All right. Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Dr. Barbara Oakley. She is a distinguished professor of engineering, but she didn't start there, though. She spent some time in the military before embarking on a career in industry, which ultimately led her to academia. So I'm really curious to learn more about her career journey and the ways in which speaking has benefited her. Welcome to Teach the Geek Interviews, Dr. Oakley.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Neil. Thank you for having me.
I saw that you have a pretty interesting background. So you got a degree in Slavic languages, and then you followed it up with a degree in electrical engineering. So what was the motivation to do that?
Oh, well, so when I was growing up, I thought I could not do math and science at all, period. In fact, I hated math with a particular purple passion. And so I enlisted in the army because I just wanted to try learning another language. I picked Russian at random. And I ended up, um, I got an in-service ROTC scholarship and ended up serving as a signal officer in West Germany. And what was funny was, I thought I'm going to end up working, in military intelligence or something because I at least can speak another language. But no, they made me into a communications officer, which is not like talking to people, except in the technical sense of working with radio systems, switchboards, and those kinds of things, which I knew nothing about. I was like, why does a circuit need to go out, but then also come back? I mean, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. So, anyway, I was the world's worst signal officer. But I got really curious about it. And when I went to get out of the army at age 26, I just thought, all my friends were West Point engineers. They were easily able to get a job, but the nobody was knocking at my door going, "Oh, we just gotta have your Slavic languages and literature skills." And so I thought, I really like adventure and looking at things from different perspectives. So why don't I try to see if I can change my mind and learn in math and science because there's lots of really interesting looking job opportunities there. So at age 26, I started at the lowest possible level of remedial high school algebra, slowly begin climbing my way upwards. And now, who would have guessed? I'm a distinguished professor of engineering and I love math and science. But it was first changing my mindset and then slowly learning about math a little bit at a time. And the more I learned, the more I began to realize that I liked what I was learning. I just turned it off completely before, and of course that's no way to learn to like something.
For sure. And yet, I noticed you also got a PhD. So what was the motivation to get the doctorate?
So um, I ended up getting my second degree in electrical engineering, and then my husband got a wonderful promotion to move to the Detroit area, and I was the dutiful wife, ha ha ha, and moved with him, and we had our two daughters, and and I just kind of kept learning because I was, I wanted to keep my brain going a little bit. So I would just take one course. Well, for a while, I did nothing because when you got super small kids, it's pretty hard. But I kind of did a master's and then I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Why don't I see if I can get a doctorate? And so I just kept going. And then when I finished that off, they were like, there's a job opening at the university. You should apply. And so I applied, and lo and behold, well, here I am now, a distinguished professor. So I'm still having, my father had Alzheimer's, which is, I know, not funny, but you have to crack jokes wherever you can. And one funny thing that he used to do was I'd visit him every day, and he'd always forget that I'd visited before. And he'd say, Barb, what are you doing nowadays? And, he remembered me from when I was a little girl who I couldn't even learn the multiplication tables. And I'd say, well, Dad, I'm a professor of engineering now. And he'd say, no, yeah, you couldn't be. So it was funny watching his reaction every day because he just remembered me as a child really hating math.
Imagine that. So you get these. So you start off in Slavic languages. You were in the military. You saw that there was no one beating your door down for a Russian speaker. So you went back to school and got degrees in electrical engineering, and you ended up in academia at some point. But was there anything in between? Did you do anything outside of the military and in academia? And if so, what kind of work did you do?
Oh, I guess I did do a little bit outside of academia. And so when I was trying to retrain my brain and learn in math and science, I would study really hard. And it's like there's nothing more alien to my former self than learning in math and science. So I would take about 6 months of it. And then it turned out there was this job where I could go out and work out at sea on Soviet trawlers as a Russian translator. And so I would work for about 6 months studying, and then I'd just go out to sea and drink all the time and get seasick and all that kind of stuff. But it was a really and by the time your liver couldn't take it anymore, then I'd come back and I'd study, and then a job opening. A job opened up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica. And my brother had worked for ITT Antarctic Services, and he told me about this job opening. And, I had radio experience from the military. I didn't tell them I was a terrible Signal Corps officer. But by that time, I was starting to get a little bit of engineering background. So I applied and I ended up going to the South Pole, and then that's where I met my husband. So I always say I had to go to the end of the earth to meet that wonderful man who we were married 41 years ago. And smartest thing I ever did was say yes when he asked me to marry him, which was 3 weeks after we met. And it's so it's been a wonderful ride since all the way through, and he's been very, very supportive in me going on in academia, but at the same time keeping me grounded so I didn't get turned into necessarily one of those pointy-headed academics who's only interested in something very narrow, but then extrapolates to much, much broader areas, even areas where they shouldn't. And so it's been wonderful having a well-grounded husband to rely on to set me straight when it was needed.
Excellent. So with the work that you do in academia, what is your research on?
Mm. Uh, one of the great things about getting tenure is you can work on whatever you want. Now, you may not make people happy when you work on whatever you want, but you can kind of work pretty much on what you want. So, one area, as soon as I got tenure, I just began working on whatever I wanted to. And part of what I was very interested in was pathologies of altruism. And what that means is, kind of good intentions. It's kind of like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And but this is a scientific way of looking at the fact that people will often think they are helping others, but when you look objectively, at what's really going on. They're actually hurting others. And I'll give you an example of this. There was a study in the 1930s of 500 Boston schoolboys. They ran this study for over 5 years. They split the boys into two pairs, two groups. So one group was given just about every advantage you could imagine. They were given extra tutoring in school, extra health care benefits. Their family was supported, like for day-to-day activities. I mean, this group was given lots of advantages. The other group, they didn't do anything to. So Joan McCord made a specialty of following up long term on studies like this. So she tracked down 30 years later virtually every one of these Boston schoolboys to see how they turned out. Turns out that one group had like way more alcoholism, drug abuse, suicides, and more ended up in prison. They were in lower quality jobs. Uh, which group was it?
Hmm. I don't know. Which one?
It was the one that was given all the advantages
Oh,
at
interesting.
enormous amounts of money. And so it took them, they couldn't even see it for the first decades because they were so certain that they were helping that they didn't even look to see if they might have been harming. And if you asked the people themselves, what did they think the effect of that study was? They all were like, oh, it was wonderful. It really helped me. They thought that. But when you looked at the actual facts, they were harmed by the program. So often, particularly in education, there's all these approaches that are thrown out there as this is really good. And the people who devise the methods are so certain that it's going to help that they don't set up a way to actually check and see whether it helps. In fact, when 9/11 happened, some 9,000 therapists descended on New York City to implement a therapy called critical incident stress debriefing, which is this is the idea that when somebody has something really traumatic, you talk to them, you get it out of them as soon as you possibly can. You have them tell you all about it so you can get it out of them. Well, it turns out that the people who devised this therapy were so certain that it was effective that they never tested it, and never to really look and see if it was effective. And so all of these 9,000 therapists descended, and they made people worse on average. And after a while, people were like, we don't seem to be helping. And in fact, they weren't. They were harming. So I guess training as an engineer, part of what that does, at least for me, is it makes me go back and look at first principles. I mean, in engineering, you get a theory wrong and the plane goes down and everybody dies. But in social sciences, you can have a theory that's completely wrong and people will just let it sail on forever because they're not really willing to look at whether it's actually truthful or effective. So I really am grateful to have studied technology and studied engineering because I think it gives me a different way of looking at what's going on in society as a whole, and certainly within education.
Wow, that is rather a departure, it would seem, from, electrical engineering to the pathologies of altruism. When you were talking, Dr. Oakley, it made me think of programs that are designed to help certain parts of the population. Are are you looking into, is your work looking into whether these programs are doing more harm than good?
I think in many cases, those programs do more harm than good, but uh, people that devise these programs certainly don't want to hear that they might be harming people. And it's in their best interest to keep promoting the program because sometimes that's how they get paid and it's how they, sort of make a name for themselves. Sometimes it's funny, but in academia, it's kind of like there's sort of two different groups, and it's hard if you're an outsider, you don't know who is who. There's people who are really willing to look at the facts and are actually trying to move the field forward. And then there's people who are perfectly willing to, kind of um, diddle with the facts. And they're so convinced that they are right that they can, misrepresent things. They'll call you all sorts of names. They'll even say all sorts of lies about you and about what's going on. They can write papers that look really good, except if you know the field, you'll look at a citation they're doing, for example, and find, wait a minute, that citation actually says completely the opposite. But if you're an outsider, it's hard for you to know which one is which. Who's lying? Somebody's got to be lying, and they can be that pernicious half. They can be so good, so smooth that if you're an outsider, it can be hard for you to tell what is truly going on. And this is why science itself can be held back by, not by, I mean, it's hard enough to do research that actually finds new advances. But sometimes the field is actually held back by the researchers themselves. For example, in Alzheimer's, for 30 years, if you didn't believe in the amyloid plaque theory, you couldn't get tenure, you couldn't get published, you couldn't get funding, you couldn't get anything. And it turns out that those main papers that founded the amyloid plaque theory, as it appears, were fraudulent and published in top journals. And when some people would point out, look, those are fraudulent papers, the journals they didn't want to retract them because that would make the journal look bad. So there's, science is really important and it can really move us forward, but there's also some real problems, at least today, in how science is frequently conducted.
Wow, this is so upsetting to hear, Dr. Oakley, because I think you're right. Because at least as far as I know from when I was young, when you think about science, it's you do experimentation and the results lead you to where they lead you. You don't start off thinking, well, this is the way it's going to be, and I'm doing this experiment to prove that what I think it is it. I can very well prove what I think is isn't. And if that's the case, well, hey, it is what it is. But I mean, if you're going into it with an idea as to what it is and you're going to suppress anything that tells you something different, well, that's a problem for all of us for sure.
That's a big problem. And if you think science is bad, educational research, I mean, it is so far from a science. In fact, of all disciplines, it is the discipline that it has the lowest rate of replication. What's that mean? It means the lowest rate of anybody going in and checking a top research paper to see if it's actually something that somebody else can find as well. Only 0.13% of all educational literature is replicated. And that means, we get this, it's like the 1800s with leeches in medicine right now in what is being put forth as far as, how people should be learning. And it's really quite a zoo out there.
Good Lord, 0.13%. That's wow, that's disturbing. That's wow. I don't.
Zero, yep, 0.13%. It's amazing.
Wow. Wow.
And so we get like the latest fad to come out is teach children to learn math while they're writing on a vertical surface, and that will somehow magically help them to learn math better. You don't have to, God forbid that you actually teach your teachers how to teach math more effectively. All you got to do is have students write on a vertical surface. Principals love it. I mean, it sounds like the easiest fix around. You don't have to help your teachers teach any better. It's really pretty ludicrous. But my hope is um, that there will be a new page being turned, because right now we're training teachers on 100-year-old obsolete theory from Dewey, Vygotsky, Piaget, Montessori, and they had some good ideas and they had some really bad ideas. And we know so much more from neuroscience now. And what needs to happen is schools of education need to have a completely new way of teaching teachers that trains kind of trilingual teachers that are trained in neuroscience, how the brain learns, in AI, and in practical ways of teaching, not being taught by professors who really have never taught themselves.
Dr. Oakley, when I first started this podcast and YouTube channel, it was all about the struggles of those with technical backgrounds or STEM backgrounds in speaking in front of others. And it still is to an extent. So, and it's really interesting to hear your background, but based on what you do, being a professor, I suspect that speaking in front of others is part of your job, at least, some semblance of it. So I'm curious, when it comes to speaking, is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what did you do to get better at it?
Oh, what a great question. I was really a horrible, horrible public speaker. I was so tongue-tied in front of other people. Do you know I had to go see a therapist because I couldn't like get up in front of even a small group and speak without becoming because I was so nervous, my vocal cords would just tighten up completely. And so I realized that, I had to get over this a little bit, especially if I was like going to be a professor who had to get up and profess in front of people. So I went to see a speech, a specialist who gave insight about how to speak in public. And a main thing she taught me was to get control of your breathing. And what I would do is, so the human brain it's either fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm very much a freeze person. Like, just don't move. Maybe they won't see you. And from an evolutionary perspective, actually, you think about it, often you point out a bird and people can't see the bird until the bird moves. So freezing is a good strategy sometimes because people just can't see something that's not moving. But anyway, what I'd do is I'd get up in front of audiences and essentially I'd kind of freeze. And that would mean I wouldn't draw air deeply into my chest. I would breathe very shallowly. And that meant, so I'm not moving my chest at all. And I'm breathing super shallowly and I'm not getting enough air. So then, hang on just a sec. So if you're not breathing in deeply, you're not getting enough oxygen, and then you start, gasping for air, and your voice gets all squeaky, and you think it's because you're nervous, and it kind of is, but it's really because you're not getting enough air, and you're not like drawing deeply into your chest, so it's going all the way down. So I learned to pause and to, like, before I would go on stage, when the panic mode would strike, I'd do box breathing, which is count of four. You breathe in, hold it, breathe out for four, hold it for four, and so forth. And I would do this deep kind of breathing. And then I found I could get up in front of people. And now, I've been in front of so many hundreds and hundreds of audiences that it's easier to get up in front of an audience than it is to, meet a couple people and just talk to them, because you know exactly what you're going to say in front of the audience. And now I feel very relaxed. And sometimes I will watch people and I can say, yeah, that person, what is it? There's exposure therapy. If you get enough exposure to the thing that scares you, it doesn't scare you anymore. And so I guess I've gotten enough exposure therapy that I'm okay in front of audiences now. In fact, sometimes I'm like pretty funny, and I'm like, where'd that come from? I'm not normally funny like that in front of, when I'm home with the family, so it's a strange thing.
Wonderful. For those who are listening or watching our conversation, Dr. Oakley, and they think that speaking is something that they want to get better at, what would you say is the first thing they should focus on doing?
Um, well, I'm going to cheat a little bit in and kind of talk about something that works really, really well for me. And it may not work as well for other people who are in other circumstances. But once I got that breathing idea down, I still um, like it when people's attention is not directly on me necessarily. I like it when they're looking at pictures. And so I developed, sort of what works for me is I really put a lot of attention into the PowerPoints that I develop. And a lot of times people do PowerPoints wrong. They have, like, here's a static picture, here's a static picture, and then another one. Every time you have a click to a new picture, you can almost think of it like you're trying to watch a movie. And if the movie just had a bunch of static scenes, it's really, it breaks your attention up. I mean, a scene has this visual flow. Your eyes, kind of follow the motion. In fact, the old movie stars Charles Bronson and Steve McQueen, they actually got in a fist fight once because Steve McQueen, he would keep, whenever Bronson was talking, Steve McQueen would fiddle. He'd do something, some kind of motion. Motion attracts attention. So McQueen was keeping the attention on him, and Bronson knew exactly what was going on. So he got really kind of mad about it. If you have a little bit of motion in your PowerPoint, and you keep, like, if you have a concept, let that concept keep flowing along from slide to slide. Use the morph function. Use that little bit of visual motion, and it will help people to, like, keep riveted on the screen and keep riveted to what you're saying. It surprises me sometimes when people get up and they'll just talk. It is, it's, I've I've only seen one person in my entire life, that was George Lakoff, who could pull off keeping your attention by just talking to you. Otherwise, your attention wanders. So good PowerPoint slides that really have compelling visuals that flow and keep a concept together. This can make for a compelling way to speak in public, to communicate your ideas, and use metaphors. You can create, if you use good visual metaphors in your PowerPoints, you can convey even the deepest and most sophisticated science, and really explain so that people can truly understand.
Wonderful. This has been a great conversation, Dr. Oakley. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Oh, just go to my website, barbaraoakley.com, and there's something that says contact Barb, and you can reach out to me there. And there's lots of courses on Coursera on how do you teach online. So there's a great course called Uncommon Sense Teaching Online that gives you a great deal of information. And then there's our old classic Learning How to Learn, which has had something like 6 million people on all the different learning platform languages that it's out on. So feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Dr. Oakley.
Well, thank you.